So, we are reviewing the new Elantra today, and well, why are we here in the office? Well, because technically I can begin from right here. Thanks to the Elantra getting the new Blue Link app, well, I can remote start and pre-cool the car, which on a hot day like today, I think I definitely want to do that. Set temperature, okay, enter your pin, and we are all done. Yep, let's go. Okay, so you probably noticed that the new Elantra has had quite a significant facelift up at the front and at the rear too. And I'll get back to that in a moment, but I want to check out the engine because the petrol now is BS6 compliant. So of course the power and the torque have stayed the same. Interestingly though, the mileage has remained the same too. Typically on BS6 cars we've seen the mileage has dropped, but Hyundai have managed to keep the figures the same. Has that had an impact on performance then? Well, that's what we want to find out. But like I said earlier, I'd show you around the car. So here at the front, the Elantra now gets the brand's sharper cut hexagonal grille, this time punctured at the top by the sharply cut headlamps that now have 4 full LED projector lamp units. The fog lights too are now sharper triangular units, while the bonnet has been reskinned with a slight power bulge in the center. At the sides, the new bit is the newly designed alloys, although still 16 inches in size, while the rear, like the front, gets a noticeable update. The redesigned LED tail lamps have been extended further into the boot lid, pushing the number plate onto the bumper below, the lower edge of which gets some massive black treatment and some fins mimicking an extended diffuser, lending it a sporty look. As for the insides, the steering is a new sleeker looking unit, the HVAC console is new, and there are also updates to some materials and colors like the carbon fiber finish above the IP. Besides the Blue Link connectivity, the Elantra also gets some new bits like a premium 8-speaker Infinity music system, wireless mobile phone charging, front parking sensors, and a tire pressure monitoring system. 6 airbags are also now standard across the range. Curiously though, the auto hold function has been deleted. The rest remains the same. It's very well equipped with bits like cooled seats, a hands-free trunk opening, and an interior air ionizer. So I've been driving the car for a while now, and well, I can tell you this, the engine, well, it does feel a bit different, where the earlier one was a lot more snappier when you put your foot down on the accelerator like this. This one, well, it's quick, but it's a lot more linear, and so yeah, well, it has dulled the performance just a bit. But I say just a bit because, well, in our timing from 0 to 100, this one clocked just half a second slower than the Bharat Stage 4 cars. So really not that much of a drop in outright acceleration. So while the snappy jackrabbit acceleration is gone, the engine is also more refined than before. And along with the fact that there is no drop in mileage, I'd say the upgrade to BS6 isn't all that bad. Now, one thing the Elantra had was the drive modes, and well, that stays as well on this car too. Of course, here you get normal, eco, sport and smart, which does adjust for your driving style. Now in eco mode, even then it doesn't feel too underpowered. Quite honestly, it's quite usable in everyday scenarios, and even carrying out a few basic overtaking maneuvers is quite possible. Sport is where it gets a lot faster, of course, but I felt that the smart mode defaulted far more towards normal, and only aggressive prods of the accelerator would keep things sporty. Okay, well, for the rest of the car, things are pretty much the same as they would be, being mechanically identical. The steering, well, it's a bit numb, doesn't have that much of feedback, but the suspension on rough roads like this, well, that's something quite nice, and you will enjoy because it does manage to isolate you from well, potholes and bumps and things like that. It's a bit more European in its setup. Of course, they haven't been able to eliminate body roll though. That's still present. but on the whole the suspension is definitely a plus point on this car. So the update has been quite significant. The facelift adds some freshness, and the BS6 engine, while blunted now, is more drivable and refined and without a drop in efficiency. And then there's the amount of features on offer, some segment unique too, making it all good value. Although prices have risen with the facelift, the Elantra is still the most affordable of the lot, priced from 15.89 lakh to 20.39 lakh ex-showroom India. Of course, if you're looking at a diesel car, the Elantra is no longer an option for you, since that's been discontinued with this update. But if you're okay with petrol power, the Elantra, being quite the all-rounder, should be high on your consideration. And how does it stack up against its rivals? Well, you'll soon know, as we've already lined that up for a shootout. So stay tuned.
The Gran Coupe, a sports car with 4 doors and space for 4, but sports car-like performance. Now this one here, the 840i, is the exact spec we're going to get in India. 340 horsepower, 500 Nm torque, and it's not too much that this car requires X-drive or 4-wheel drive, which of course makes the whole driving experience heavier and more leaden. We have the car with us for the day. Let's see how good it is to drive, and importantly, how nice it is to sit in the back. But first up, just what do we have here? With its low-slung sports car-like nose, fast-flowing roof and strong shoulders, the 8 Series Gran Coupe is a luxury Grand Tourer or 4-door GT. The long flat bonnet and tight-fitting roof lend a lot of elegance. China isn't listed as the #1 market for the 8 Series range, so it doesn't come with a grille that's supersized. Rather, the grille is wide, the headlights aren't fused together with it, and what I particularly like is those hexagonal LED accents in the headlights. They just hit the spot. The rear is probably the most attractive bit of this car. The integrated ducktail spoiler reminds you of a Porsche 911 from the early 70s, and what makes the rear look even more attractive is that the 840i sits on a wide base, which of course helps give it that bottom heavy look. But what's it like to drive? Well, the product brief clearly states that the new 8 Series Gran Coupe should drive like a 2-door sports car, and that's no easy task for something that weighs 1.8 tons. There is, however, plenty of performance under the hood. Now at 340 horsepower, this car shouldn't really feel this quick. But when you put your foot down, that 500 Nm of torque comes in, and it just feels quick enough to be really fun. Now right now I have it in comfort, and if I select sport, the reaction from the box is even faster. And there's a nice snarl from under the bonnet. Typical BMW 6-cylinder straight 6 snarl, and the kind of pace and driving pleasure it delivers is just fantastic. And what I also like about this engine is that despite it being turbocharged, it pulls all the way till 7,000 RPM. At 7, and again, super. That just never gets old. With such a long wheelbase, BMW's integral active steering or rear wheel steering helps virtually shortening the wheelbase, and this makes it feel a lot more agile. What this 840i also does beautifully is sit comfortably at a high speed and give you tremendous confidence to carry speed through corners. It's got a beautiful balance to it. It's got a nice long chassis, wide track, and every time you turn in, that rear wheel steering really does help you point the car into corners, especially some of the faster ones. And flick it into a tighter corner and the car follows your instruction without hesitation. Unlike the heavy-footed four-wheel drive cars, there's a litheness and an agility to the way 840i handles. And what helps is that the steering is nice and direct and full of feel. Now at high speed, there is a bit of vertical movement if the road is less than perfect. And that's because of the short springs. And you do have to step back a bit, take it a bit easy when you see those bad patches. Still, ride at everyday speeds is pretty impressive, especially considering the wheels this car is on. It doesn't feel like an everyday sedan from the inside for sure. The shallow windows give it a cockpit-like feel, and what accentuates this is that the wide center console runs the length of the cabin. The four individual sport seats and headrests looking pretty different too. Now the first thing you realize when you sit here is that this is a really low and sporty driving position. And that's just great. You feel like driving this car long distance and fast, like you should any GT. And the seat is perfect for the job. You can adjust it as you want. You have super support for your shoulders, important when you're driving long distance, and tremendous lower back support that you can adjust. Of course, the highest quality on the inside here, loads and loads of this double stitched leather, even on top of the door pad, and Bowers & Wilkins' finest audio system with plenty of metallic highlights. So it just feels very plush and comfortable and suitable as a sport luxury GT. There are many carried over bits, but some actually work well here. Interesting mesh metallic design here, and of course BMW likes to give you a bit more bling, so there's this crystal insert on the top of the iDrive controller, on the gear lever and on the start stop button. It's pretty cool. The rear isn't as comfortable as something like a 5 Series, that's for sure. So an extremely sporty sort of seat. It is a bit upright in the back, and of course headroom is just about sufficient for someone who's my height. So 6-footers and people taller than that are likely to have a bit of an issue. But reasonable comfort, decent amount of legroom even with my driving position. And yes, it does feel very unique and different. You do feel you're sitting in something special, something very sporty. And the center console that comes all the way back here has a lot of interesting stuff and looks pretty cool. This wire mesh sort of finish on top, the metallic finish, and you have your own aircon controls here, 2 USB-Cs, and this elbow rest is also adding a lot to the comfort levels. But again, it's a bit tight, and with this big headrest and the big seat, you do feel a bit hemmed in. If you are in the market for a 4-door coupe, the 840i makes a great case for itself. It drives like a thoroughbred rear-wheel drive coupe, it has an energetic and willing motor, and sitting in the cabin feels special. The center consoles, both at the front and the rear, are a bit too wide. Seat comfort in the rear is not great, and for India we strongly recommend smaller 19 or even 18-inch wheels. Expected to make landfall here by mid-2020, the 840i will be expensive at an expected price of Rs 1.4 crores. Still, if you're looking for a 4-door coupe that both looks good and drives superbly, the 840i is right up there with the best.
MV Agusta makes some of the most rewarding and sensational motorcycles that I've ever ridden. But by a natural extension of that, these Italian exotics are quite high-strung and they're not very easy to live with. The motorcycle we have here today though, this might tell a different story. This is the Turismo Veloce 800 and it's a bike the company likes to call the everyday MV. So, can this bike really offer the best of both worlds? Well, that's what we're here to find out. The good news is that the Turismo is an authentic MV in the ways that matter. First, it's got an exotic sounding name that proves everything sounds cooler in Italian. And then there's the way it looks. There's far too many ugly SUVs out there that point out just how hard it is to make a big and tall vehicle look good. MV has just outdone themselves in this regard, and I imagine that half the people who buy one will do so because this bike looks so good. Every single angle on this motorcycle is a treat to behold, but the most familiar one is the face, which looks like it came straight off MV's super sport exotic, the F3. The side profile is dominated by a muscular 21.5 litre fuel tank, as well as that fascinating seat arrangement. I've never seen such an ornate subframe design, and it's quite amazing how MV has managed to make two rather large and comfy seats look this sensational. It's also impossible to miss the tiny 3 exhaust pipes and that exposed rear wheel, both design features that are also lifted from the F3. Move over to the rear and you'll be awestruck at that tall and slim tail, which is completely free from boring things like indicators and a number plate. There's also so much to take in when it comes to the smaller details, and if you look hard enough, you'll see that even the tail lamp shape is a play on the alphabets M and V. In that sense, it really isn't much of an exaggeration to compare an MV Agusta with art. In fact, that's exactly where the company got their tagline from. True to its name, the Turismo Veloce was built to cover big distances, and there are plenty of small creature comforts to help with this. The windscreen is height adjustable, cruise control is standard, and heated grips can be had as an option. We counted 4 different charging ports all over, and there are a couple of small cubbies on either side of the instrument console as well. Speaking of, this is the first MV in India to offer a full color display, which is quite informative but also quite cluttered to look at. Now I could go on gushing about how fantastic this bike looks, but a pretty face will only take you so far. Thankfully, this MV has much more substance under the skin. This 3-cylinder engine, for example, it's almost identical to what you'll find in the wild Brutale 800, and that's a very good thing. At 110 HP, this engine makes exactly the same amount of power as the Brutale, but the torque figure is slightly higher. The motor feels and sounds nearly the same as well, with a thrilling scream at high revs, accompanied by a tiny but consistent amount of vibration. It really is an exciting, action-packed motor that feels faster than the spec sheet suggests. If anything, the Turismo's heavier weight along with a longer wheelbase means it isn't as prone to power wheelies as the Brutale and the F3, but hit a small crest in the road and the front wheel will quite happily wave at the sky. MV's bi-directional quickshifter is standard on this bike, and it continues to be the best I've experienced so far. Another MV aspect that remains is the fact that the ride-by-wire throttle feels artificial and the throttle response is sharp but not very consistent, especially in sport mode. Talking about electronics, this is another area that's just like the Brutale, and you get 4 riding modes, 8-level traction control and switchable ABS. The hardware components are also very familiar, with a trellis frame holding the bike together. Suspension is handled by the trademark combination of a 43mm Marzocchi fork and a Sachs rear shock, both of which are adjustable. The brakes come straight off MV's sports bikes, and the twin Brembo front disc setup works just as well as you'd expect. It comes as no surprise then that even though this MV stands tall, it's very happy to lean over in the corners. I never ran out of cornering clearance, and the grip from the Bridgestone tires was never a problem either. Through a glorious morning spent tearing through the twisties, the Turismo made it apparent that it holds a bias towards the sports side of Sport Tourer, and considering that this is an MV Agusta, I'd expect nothing less. In terms of riding thrills, the Turismo Veloce does not disappoint. So we've established that it looks like an MV and it goes like one too. But what about the everyday part? Well, there's a number of positives in that aspect too. First of all, there's the riding position, which has you sitting nice and upright, although the foot peg position is a bit sporty. Wind protection is decent, but it's not excessive, which is a good thing in our hot climate. I also discovered that the bike doesn't need to be ridden flat out to be fun, and it is quite happy to settle into a lazy cruise on the highway. But the biggest win comes in the form of ride quality. On most MVs, if you encounter a pothole at the last minute, there's not much more you can do apart from keeping the throttle open and sending a sincere set of thoughts and prayers to your higher power of choice. But the Turismo is so much better in this regard, and even though the suspension is firm, it can genuinely cope with our horrible road conditions thanks to 160mm of wheel travel on offer. That being said, this is not an off-roader because it just doesn't have the ground clearance, and you do need to be a little cautious over very tall speed breakers. So yes, the Turismo is vastly easier than any MV before to live with, but it's not all perfect. For starters, the seat height is really tall, And as Samir, our cinematographer, who's 5 feet 4 inches tall, is now going to demonstrate, the Turismo may be the everyday MV, but it's not for everyone. That everyday part may be a bit of a stretch in India as well, because this bike does not like getting stuck in the average big city evening commute. The heat build-up after about half an hour in crawling traffic is quite extreme, and if you don't give the engine enough space to cool, it will eventually cut out. And while we're addressing negatives, quality could stand to improve in certain areas as well. The design and finish are mostly excellent, but we did notice that moisture had seeped into some of the lights and the rear left indicator stopped working altogether. And while the new switchgear is a big improvement, the switches themselves still feel far too cheap for a bike that costs this much money. And at Rs 18.99 lakh ex-showroom, this is a serious amount of money indeed. We're talking about the kind of money that will get you a Ducati Multistrada 1260S, a bike that offers as good as 50 horsepower more, as well as electronically adjustable suspension, and that's a hard pill to swallow. Now, I'm not going to stand here and tell you that this bike offers any significant form of value for money. It's actually quite far from it. But the Turismo Veloce does have a number of redeeming qualities if you find yourself fascinated by the idea of owning an MV in India. The thing about MV Agustas is that every time I ride one on a nice road or the racetrack, the flood of emotions completely drowns out concerns about the price. The Turismo offers most of these feelings, but crucially, its ability to do that doesn't fall apart the moment the road stops being nice. If you're a road rider who absolutely adores what MV Agustas are all about, and if value for money plays no part in your vocabulary, this MV is probably the sweetest of the lot.
And now it's time for tips on sustainability and protecting the environment with Servo Futura G Plus from Indian Oil. Turn your engine off at traffic lights or when the car's stopped. Make sure your car's filters are clean.